This is the webinar on demand side response from domestic sources on our Flex Your Power webinar series. We have started recording this and we will send this round at the end afterwards. By way of background, that this series of webinars has been designed to help asset owners and the Flex provider share insights into the potential value of unlocking participation in the local Flex markets. We have some special guests with us who will share their top tips and their experience. And at the end of the session, there will be some detailed Q&A. So please think about your questions and put them in the chat as we go through or at the end. So finally, I'd just like to thank Energy UK, who've helped organise this with us. And the first speaker that you can see is Naomi from Energy UK. So I will be handing over to her now, and she'll be the first panel speaker who will be talking for about 10 minutes to give us a perspective on the policy and markets overview. So I'll hand over to Naomi. So thank you, Naomi.
Hi, so I'm Naomi Baker from Energy UK. I lead our work on energy storage and demand side response. So first of all, thank you very much, Matthew and Piclo, for inviting us and for organising this series of webinars. I think it's a really interesting area. It's developing fast, there's lots of change, so it's really helpful to have these webinars just to catch up on all the change and hear different perspectives. So a bit about Energy UK. On the next slide is a quick summary of our members. So we're an energy trade body. Our USP is that we're whole of the market, whole of the downstream market. So we try and get balanced positions between different actors in the market. Our members account for 80% of the UK's power generation and over 95% of domestic supply. Also lots of other people working in the sort of new energy space, such as Piclo, heat, technology, EVs, all that kind of thing. Next slide, please. So I've been asked to talk about domestic flexibility. This is just a really quick snapshot of some of the key documents that I've pulled out from about 2017 to where we are now. So I'm not going to go through them, but maybe the first one to pull out is the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, which was first produced in 2017. That was then updated in 2021. But one key thing that it did was put a volume on the level of flexibility that we might need in the future system. So that put it at 30 gigawatts of short-term flexibility, which includes DSR. So shortly after that, the government put out the British Energy Security Strategy, which focused almost solely on generation. So it massively increased the sort of future generation that we're likely to have on the system. So a fourfold increase in offshore wind to 50 gigawatts and a fivefold increase to solar, but without looking at what that would mean for balancing the system. So the last thing that I'm going to pull out is the second National Infrastructure Assessment from the National Infrastructure Commission, which was published in October. So that provided a key recommendation to the government that they update the level of flex that might be needed on the future system. So they thought 60 gigawatts of short and medium flexibility is needed. So that includes DSR. So we've got a much better, sort of more accurate feel of what the system need might be for 2030. Next slide, please. Right. So why do we need domestic flexibility? This is a quite nice picture, nice graphic from Cornwall Insight. So they did a recent report called The Power of Flex, where they looked to quantify some of the benefits. So one of the reasons why we need domestic flexibility is because of the electrification of demand. So by 2030, there could be around 3 million heat pumps on the system. There could be between 5 and 13 million battery electric vehicles. If those aren't operated smartly, then they will increase peak demand. So Cornwall estimated it could increase peak demand by 2.5 gigawatts. So either we need new generation assets and new network assets to deal with that peak, higher peak, or we use flexibilities to spread that demand out to reduce that peak. Next slide, please. So this is quite a busy slide. I'm not going to go through it all, but the second key reason of why we need it is to optimize renewables output. So I've already mentioned that there's the target for 50 gigawatts of offshore wind. Clearly, that's a highly variable resource. We need to use it when it's windy. So it's the whole, what do we do when the wind doesn't blow, sun doesn't shine? So there's two aspects of that. One, there'll be shortfalls. So if you look at this, this diagram from LCP Delta, there'll be shortfalls. They estimate there could be shortfalls for about 5% of hours. So that's one thing. But maybe what's less talked about is that there'll be surplus generation on the system around half the time. So it's really important that we can use that that surplus generation so that it adds value to the system rather than cost. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of where we are now. So domestic flexibility, it's really a nascent market. So there are system changes going on. So market-wide half-hourly settlement and the completion of the smart meter rollout. So those will kick in sort of the end of 2025, the smart meter rollout, end of 2026 for half-hourly settlement. So that will provide incentives for suppliers to more accurately look at when domestic consumers are using energy and incentivize them to put more products in the market. So what I'm really interested in, and what Energy UK have been doing quite a lot of thinking on, is what happens in this space before 2020, end of 2026, 2027. How do we accelerate this very nascent market now, rather than just waiting till 2027? So this is a quick high-level snapshot. I won't go into the DNO markets because Lewis is here to talk about that. So you can see in the capacity market, for example, there's a little bit of DSR at the moment. Almost all of that is industrial and commercial, but the government is consulting on changes that it can make so that from next year that would be more suitable for aggregated domestic flexibility. Likewise, I will highlight the balancing mechanism. So that's the main balancing tool that National Grid ESO uses. At the moment, as you can see, most of it is gas. So that's indicated by the grey on the bar charts. The control room processes and the IT platforms that the ESO use make it difficult for it to manage smaller assets and aggregated assets. So it is bringing in changes, a new IT platform, which will help with that, and it will enable it to dispatch multiple smaller assets at the same time. So that will help domestic flexibility. Likewise, it's looking at the metering standards that it requires for small assets. It requires accuracy to 1% at the moment, but potentially accuracy to 2.5% could work. That would make it much easier, and that would reduce some of the barriers to electric vehicles, for example. So that's a snapshot. It's nascent, but things are changing. Next slide, please. So I wanted to do a case study of the demand flexibility service. I'm sure you're all aware of it. But I think that's really changed the landscape for domestic flexibility, particularly in this sort of period 2023 to 2027, rather than sort of waiting for these changes to happen. It's really got industry and government and Ofgem thinking about, okay, how can we accelerate some of that change now? So as I'm sure you're aware, it was a National Grid ESO service. It was it rose out of the gas crisis last year. There was a real concern that there might not be enough gas because of the war in Ukraine. So the objective was to bring forward extra untapped capacity that could increase the sort of system buffers just in case, just to ensure security of supply. So it's the largest trial we've had of a demand reduction service, and I think it's the first time globally that aggregated domestic demand has been used to balance the national grid. So it's attracted a lot of interest here and overseas. It was used by 1.6 million domestic customers and business customers. So there was a huge level of interest. I think that's one of the key things to highlight. Also, it was very effective. It showed that load that is aggregated and predicted can be firm. So the key thing to highlight is this chart from Octopus, one of the key suppliers involved in the service. So this shows really clearly the load shifting that happened during the 1 hour DFS event in January last year. Next slide, please. So this has some nice stats for DFS. So because of this success, it's running again this year. I think it's been called once for a live event, and I think 3 times for a test event. So whereas last year it was one of 2 enhanced measures to protect system margins, preserve system margins, this year the other one was a coal reserve. The coal generation isn't available this year, so it is just the DFS. I think it's really interesting that the tightness on the system caused by the very cold weather last week, plus there was little wind, there wasn't so much coming through the interconnectors, and I think a couple of gas plants were off, which resulted in the service being called for real to support balancing. It shows that it has domestic flexibility is working now to support system margins. And I think it really shows that there is more scope in the next few years to develop this resource. So the service is running this year. National Grid ESO has committed to use either the DFS or an alternative vehicle to help domestic flexibility transition. At the moment, it's not a commercial model, it's an out-of-market model, and the prices that it pays are a lot higher than average balancing prices. So the challenge will be to try and have it work as an in-market model. That will mean that whatever comes next, the next iteration of the service will need to be able to revenue stack with other products and services, because the volumes, the prices are likely to be lower. Next slide, please.
You're nearly out of time, Naomi.
Okay, I think this might be my last slide. So I wanted to highlight this call for input, which was published earlier this year from Ofgem. So Ofgem are doing a lot of work in this space. The pie chart on the left shows what respondents to the call for input, the value that they put on the importance of domestic DSR. So 87% of respondees felt that it was very important in the future system. The blue blocks on the slide show some of the problems that Ofgem has highlighted, some of the barriers that it wants to work on. I think there's another slide after this one. Yes, so this quite busy slide is Ofgem setting out some of the problems, some of the barriers for domestic flexibility, and it's got an ongoing work stream that will aim to tackle these barriers. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not going to go through these, but there's a couple of slides that you can have a look on the slide pack, which are really just highlighting some of the work that Energy UK does on equity, diversity and inclusion, and also the Young Energy Professionals initiative that we run for the industry. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. So really good to hear that broader perspective from Energy UK. So I will be speaking next. So I'm Matthew Bilson. I'm Policy and Market Strategy Director from PICLO. And I'll be talking a little bit more about this local flexibility markets specifically. I think to emphasize, Naomi mentioned there the DFS, Demand Flex Service, so similar words, but that's raised publicity of how consumers can get paid to take action. As Naomi said, that's actually a temporary market. And I think what we wanted to emphasize, what these local flex markets, which the distribution system operators have, are permanent markets, which therefore offer an additional revenue stream, a different revenue stream for you as aggregators to secure revenue from, and therefore also potentially pay on to end consumers the domestic activity that you may be aggregating. So with that, if we move on to the next slide. So PICLO is a market platform. It's a marketplace where we connect buyers, in this case grid operators, to sellers, which are usually aggregators, or it can be single asset owners, but usually for the domestic setting, domestic consumers will come through an aggregator or a supplier. So the PICLO platform, the provider, the aggregators can then view the different areas where these local flex markets are active. So these procurement events or competitions or auctions, you might call them, you can view where those are, and then you as the aggregator or the asset owner can then upload your assets and participate in these auctions. And these are usually run to help alleviate grid constraints, but also create extra value for the capacity of the assets. As it stands today, Piclo Flex is used by 4 of the distribution grid operators. You can see their logos. So it's National Northern Power Grid, ENWL, who are speaking after me, SPEN, and UKPN. And then there's also a constraint market which we run for ESO in Scotland. And we also offer this similar service internationally. So moving on to the next slide, how does it work? What do you have to do as an asset owner or an aggregator? So here you can see a typical end-to-end cycle of the participation in a competition or auction. So it starts with the system operator, so it could be ENWL, conducting an analysis of its grid and identifying where specifically in very specific locations where there may be constraints. Once they've identified the constraint, they pass that information onto Piclo, and that's where we add that information onto the map view that you saw on the previous area. Then that's where you as the asset owner starts becoming involved. So the first step you do is register on the Piclo site. And then you also have to provide some information about your company, so company qualification. From there, you'll then be able to see if your assets fall within the specific locations of the competition and auction zones that you can see on the map. And our platform notifies you of this to make it easy. So once there's a live auction area, you'll be notified of this. The next step is assessing the technical qualification as well as commercial qualification. And that's relatively straightforward, and it's facilitated by the platform as well. Once that's all done, once you're a qualified asset owners, you can then bid into the auctions. So you bid in, you decide what price you want to try and sell your flexibility at, and that you enter that into the bid tender. Following the closure of the auction window, you'll be notified of the competition results. So this is kind of at the end, going around this U shape of the picture that you can see. Our platform then facilitates dispatch services so that you'll get notified when the system operator wishes to activate the flexibility. And then you'll be asked for evidence that you have done that dispatch, which is usually in the form of metering information. Once that has been assessed and confirmed, you will then be paid and invoiced for that service. So all the way through to payment. And all of this can be done manually, but it can also be automated. So we have APIs which we can help you to interface with to make it as easy as possible for you to not only access your assets, but also bid into the competitions. We move on to the next slide. And again, just to say, remember, if you've got questions, please put them in the chat because we'll pick those up at the end. So why should you participate in these local flex markets? As we said, it's an additional revenue stream for your assets, either you as an aggregator or ultimately as the asset owner. Also, this revenue stream, and you can bid in with both existing assets but also planned assets. So some of these auctions are for several months, if not years ahead. And therefore that means if you are planning to build an asset, you can bid in with your planned asset, even if it's not built. And if it's selected, that will then give you some certainty of a revenue stream, which reduces the market and financial risk to you to build your asset. The bidding platform, so Piclo, is free to use for you, which makes it easier for you to bid into these markets as well. So we think there's many reasons why it's attractive to bid in. This next slide shows you the number of opportunities there are across the autumn and winter. So there are about 1.5 gigawatts of opportunities available, and the payments that you could get are worth over £27 million. So it's a significant revenue stream potentially. It'd be unusual for a single aggregator, I should say, to get all of that money, but it's not impossible. And it's across 1,000 locations. So these auctions are location specific, but there are right across the country. Specifically, I suppose zooming on some of the nearer term and the competitions are just still active. ENWL, which Lois will talk about, I think a little bit in a minute. They will be procuring 400 megawatts, and the qualification window is open now and closes in January. And I think they're expecting that to be worth anything up to £7 million. A much sooner opportunity as well is in Scotland and other areas. So Spen, and you can see some of the details there. They're procuring 300 megawatts across 500 locations. The important point to note here is the qualification. So you have to register and provide some information by tomorrow. It's the 8th of December. So if you are not yet on the platform and interested, please do contact us and we can help you get involved in that competition as well. And then to add that there's the ESO we run continuous competitions for in Scotland in particular. So if you're interested, please get in touch. And then there are two other system operators, Northern Power Grid and UKPN, who have a mixture of forward notification of some of the aspects that they need. And then UKPN, the qualification has closed. So if you're not qualified yet, then unfortunately you won't be able to bid into those competitions at the moment. So there's a lot of information there, but as I said, we will be sending these slides around later. But I think this is perhaps a key slide that if you're interested in getting involved in these markets and accessing part of that £27 million, there's different opportunities for you to do so, depending where you have assets located. But do pay attention to some of the deadlines, as we said, for the Spen areas, and you see the locations there around Scotland and North Wales, that closes effectively. You have to qualify by tomorrow. For the areas under ENWL, you have a bit more time going into January to do that. So just moving on to the next slide, you can find more information here on these links. For specific information, some of the system operators and network companies have information as well, which is accessible through Piclo. And then we also offer additional training and support that can be on a one-to-one basis, but also through our online Piclo Academy, as it's called. So you can get video tutorials to help you through this process. And finally, we announced a new product that we're launching early next year, called Piclo Max. Now, Piclo Max will help you as aggregators or assets access not only the local flexibility markets we've just been talking about, but also all the other electricity markets that there are, such as DFS, but also wholesale market, capacity market, etc., balancing mechanism. So we think there's an opportunity to make it as simple as possible for you as an asset owner to access all these electricity markets in one place. So again, if you want to know more about that, please get in touch with us. But with that, I will now hand over to Lois, who will give you a perspective from a network operator specifically. So thank you very much, and I'll pass you over to Lois.
Hi, morning everyone. I just had to check there and make sure we were still in the morning. Thank you for joining today, and yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak. So if we just nip on to the next slide, I'll just give a bit of an introduction to Electricity North West. So we are the distribution network operator that covers the whole northwest of England. So this goes from Carlisle and the Scottish boundary down to Buxton, Macclesfield in the edge of the Peak District. So we currently have about 2.4 million customers, and that's over 37,000 substations. So quite a lot of assets, but covering a range of different geographies, from some quite urban areas in the south near Manchester and Preston, but predominantly rural up in the north across Cumbria and the Lake District. So got the best of both worlds and the most of the M6. So that's the easy way to think of us. If you could hop on to the next one, please. So I'm just going to follow on a little bit from what Naomi was saying earlier about the massive increase that we are seeing within the generation, especially low carbon generation, but also heat pumps and electric vehicles. So this is just a bit of a glance of our latest DFES. So that's one of many acronyms that you will hear me go through today. So it's our distribution future electricity scenarios. So these are the 5 scenarios that we model on all of our substations to estimate the demand and the generation that we have on them in relation to their capacity, to identify headroom and therefore opportunities for reinforcement and subsequently flexibility, to be able to alleviate those constraints. So just as some of the high level figures to contextualise the scale of the challenge that we're about to embark on, if you like. So on the left hand side here we have the values in 2023. So for electric vehicles that's 114,000, or heat pumps only 26,000, whereas by 2030 we're expecting nearly 1.4 million electric vehicles on the network and 750,000 heat pumps. So, you know, tenfold increases on existing volumes within the next 7, well, it's not even 7 years now, is it? We're too close to Christmas to call it 7. But there's a significant increase in these low carbon technologies on the network that wasn't necessarily designed to cope with them in the first place. So because of that, our reinforcement requirements are increasing significantly over this price control period, but also over the 2030s and into the 2040s as we adapt to all of these new technologies. So if you could go on to the next slide. Just to give a bit of background into our approach to flexibility so far. So we started procuring flexibility in 2018, and so far that's been across 76 locations under 13 tenders with 4 gigawatts of requirement. So our latest tender that Matthew just flashed up, a bit of a sneak preview of on his previous slides, is for up to 7 million, and we've got 29 locations, and this is offering it's split into service windows that cover the next 5-year period. So we've consulted several times over the last few years to understand what the optimum length of contracts are, because this has varied significantly between different providers. Sometimes if you're building a larger asset, you might want to have a longer contract, so you've got more of a guarantee of revenue. So you could have a 5-year contract, and that ticks off your initial investment period, if you like. Whereas we're increasingly seeing, as we move towards more domestic resources, that shorter contracts are preferred, because those consumer habits are much harder to model on a daily basis compared to an industrial plant or a generator on a much more kind of static load profile. So we are trying to adapt some of our processes to be able to offer shorter and longer term contracts, but also procurement cycles, so that we're able to adapt to all different levels of consumers. If you could go on to the next slide, please. This is just a bit of a breakdown of how our requirements are currently split per region. So there's significantly more of our current requirements within Cumbria and Lancashire. So we're seeing a lot of our more rural sites becoming more constrained. So the blue areas on this map, they demonstrate our current requirements. They're included within the tender, and the grey areas show where there is going to be a requirement within the next 3 to 5 or 5 to 10 years. So if you like, it's overlaying those forecasts of where we're seeing significant increases in low carbon technologies and how that's materialising to some quite clustered constraint zones within these different regions of the network. If you could go on to the next one, please. This is just an overview of our timeline of where we're at the moment. So remember, if you're in spends network, you need to pre-qualify by tomorrow. But if you're within our network, then you have until 19th of January. And this is using all of the new qualification, commercial and technical pre-qualification questions. So these are a set of questions that have been agreed at the Open Networks, which is an industry body under the ENA, where all different networks get together to look to standardise some of these processes and products. So currently the tenders are using the new technical and commercial qualifications, and then looking forward to next year, we'll look to standardise a lot more of these elements, making sure that the experience, especially for aggregators, is a lot more simple. So you'd have the same set of forms wherever you are in the country to ease that participation. But ultimately, the qualifications will close in the spring, with contract awards in March, with a view to delivery later in the year. So this is a key point that I did want to bring out, because there has been quite a lot of discussion recently about the stackability of services, and especially as Naomi's mentioned about DFS and how it's been such a fantastic scheme for really stimulating domestic participation within markets. But there has been some elements of controversy about the stackability or exclusivity of these services. So one benefit that we do have of our tenders being set into different windows of summer and winter periods of delivery is that it shouldn't be seen as an off-put to participating in the tenders that are currently live, because the periods of delivery, you can opt to which windows you would like to participate in, therefore not overlapping with the DFS windows and those exclusivity elements. And yeah, the first window for delivery would be beginning in April 2024, so would miss that key constraint period. The next slide, please. So this is, I'm just going to give you a whistle-stop tour in the next few slides about some of the work that we've been doing over the last year to continually evolve our approach to try and make it as open as possible to as many participants as possible. So our consultation that was held over summer was engaging with as many people as possible through as many different channels as possible, to see how we can improve and what especially our local stakeholders wanted to prioritise in terms of our development of these services. So the consultation was split into data sharing, engagement, technical requirements and contracting. So there's a full suite of documents that are available on our website, but if you go on to the next slide, please, and then we just a bit of an overview. So the pie chart on the left shows the different type of respondents that we had to this, and some of the key bits of feedback was the increased standardisation. So the overwhelming majority of people across the industry want this standardisation, both of products, APIs, platforms and windows, so that these services are more stackable in the future. So a key aspect of unlocking the value of flexibility is through the stackability with ESO markets, with other revenue streams to really make the most out of your asset, but help to join forces really to flatten out some of those curves. So the variations that we see within the processes and technical requirements across all the distribution networks, but also across ESO markets, can make that extremely difficult. And when you're confronted with a choice, you often choose the easiest one, or the one that will give you the most revenue. So we want to make sure that they're standardised as much as possible, so that we remove these barriers, so that participation should be easy for all. As a result of this, we did also look at the minimum thresholds. So if you remember our regional requirements in our current tender, a large proportion of our requirements are within the rural parts of our network, so within East Lancashire and in Cumbria. And so recognising that especially for aggregators, it's quite hard to meet that minimum criteria for participation. So it used to be set at 50 kilowatts, whereas if it's a very small locality or a village in rural Cumbria, that might be quite a high threshold to reach. And so we have looked at that and reducing it down to 10 kilowatts to really encourage participation there might be several different aggregators that are operating within the region, so we can then aggregate those on their behalf, if you like, so that we can meet our total capacity requirement.
Nearly out of time, Lois.
Right, thank you. So as a summary then, our 50 kilowatt requirement has gone down to 10 to make remove that barrier to entry. We've also implemented a one-off commercial qualification requirement. So instead of having to go back in and re-update all of the commercial aspects, so audit records, insurance documents and stuff, it will remain on there until something changes and you have a requirement to update it. We've also now changed our technical specification to allow for half-hourly metering. This used to be set at second by second, but recognise that it can be a financial barrier to entry because of the cost of installing some of these the metering equipment. And we're also going to adopt a separate energy efficiency product from spring 24. So that will be able to participate in the majority of the services that we have on our network, as we have the majority of our requirements are linked to demand reduction. And then the last bit is on contracts, but if you go on to the next slide, I'll give you a quick overview of market development. So another part of my role is I chair the Open Networks work stream that looks at market development. And so 4 key elements that sit under this work stream are the products. So currently we have sustain, secure, dynamic and restore. So these have been heavily revised, and there's now 5 products that have got common parameters that will be common throughout all networks within the UK, and there's a commitment to implement all of those by April 2024. The pre-qualification elements, this applies to both technical and commercial. So these have already been implemented, the majority of them within the PICLO system, but any kind of stragglers to be also sorted by April 24. And it's also noted that ESO are consulting on this through their annual C16 process to see how they can align their markets with these new standard questions as well. Again, helping to simplify that process for participation in multiple markets through one channel. The common contract, sorry, I will take 2 seconds. The common contract, boring as it is, we always have to cover the legal stuff. So we're currently working on version 3, which will be used as a framework style agreement. So this is fundamentally changing the way in which distribution network operators will operate their flexibility tenders. So by signing a set of terms and conditions up front, the values that you bid in for will then form part of that contractual agreement and will allow us to move towards short-term procurement, but also much more short-term flexibility markets, which, as we've seen, are a lot more attractive to the domestic market because of that. How we're unsure about what we're doing in the next day, and we're also working on those settlement processes. But the final slide has just got all of our contact details should anyone have any questions about anything or would require any one-to-one support with participation in a tender, but also any other queries about distribution and network market. And then I'm done.
Thanks very much, Lois. Thank you. So final speaker before moving on to the Q&A. So please do think about your questions you want to ask us. Very happy and very pleased to welcome Tom, who is speaking from myenergi about their experiences from bidding into local flex and other flexibility markets. So hand over to Tom. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matthew. So going straight to the next slide, it's just a placeholder. We don't need to spend time on that one. Thank you. So a bit of an introduction to the myenergi group for those of you that aren't familiar with us. Some of you will have heard our name before. Some of you might know our sort of iconic headline product called the Zappi EV charger. So much so that most people think I work for Zappi rather than myenergi, which is a product rather than a company name. But the myenergi group is becoming more and more well known now. We're a UK-based business, UK-based manufacturer. We're about 7 years old. We've now got around 350 employees and 5 subsidiaries. So we're active in Germany, Australia, Ireland, and Benelux as well. So we've got a wide range of interest across the world, not just in the UK. Although we are a manufacturer, we're also a digital platform provider. So we have a digital customer platform and home energy management ecosystem that allows our customers to interact with our products and other products as well, potentially that they can bring into that system where we can integrate. Our products are mostly designed to maximise renewable generation, so self-generation. So we work incredibly well with solar and other forms of microgeneration at the domestic level. But we can obviously operate without those inputs as well. So we can equally be used, for example, as a smart EV charger or a smart home battery without any renewable supply being required. So we can go probably onto the next slide. So in terms of the problem we're trying to address, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call are trying to address, it's kind of the twofold problem which we've already spoken about on this webinar already. So we have I guess starting on the right hand side in a way, we've got the grid constraint challenge being presented by LCTs entering the network, and obviously the shift to renewables and everything else that we're seeing in terms of a demand increase across the board. So we know the figures, for example, from the Committee on Climate Change, looking at a potential 3- to 4-fold increase in total electricity consumption by 2050, and obviously that brings with it challenges for distribution networks in particular as well. And then in the home, we have an obviously typical household bill today. For most homes still don't have an EV. Most homes don't have solar. Most homes are fairly limited in what they have from a low carbon technologies point of view today, but we know that will change. Electric vehicles in particular will obviously shift the fuel spend from the forecourt and petrol and diesel bills to the home energy bill in many cases for people that can charge their electric car at home. And we know that will generally increase the domestic electricity bill on its own by well over 50%. So it is a sudden increase in cost for the consumer, albeit one that's lower than the average spend on petrol or diesel every year. But it is a consideration when it comes to the management of the supply to that property and the need to control it. So, for example, our EV chargers have load limiters on them, and we know that it's an increasing area of focus to ensure that the electric vehicles are not a parasitic load on the system and are indeed a beneficial part of the energy mix, and we're sure they will be. Added to that, obviously, we've got the increase in the electrification of heat and hot water, in which we're very much involved, which again are adding cost, but also demand on that local supply and individual supply to that one property. So there are these two sort of challenges that we are trying to solve as a business, and indeed as a whole energy system. We all need to work together to tackle these competing problems. So we can probably go on to the next slide. This really comes back and is anchored in our purpose and vision. So when our two founders, so some of you will be aware of our two founders, it's Jordan Brompton, he's our kind of genius marketeer, and Lee Sutton, who's our genius engineer. One of those two founders started the business back in 2016. Their view was very much that they wanted to remove the barriers to a green future. Very simple. Whether that was through technology, whether it's through removing technological barriers, financial barriers, behavioural barriers. They were sure that we needed to get to this green future, but also they recognised there were barriers along the way that we needed to try and tackle as a business, and we've predominantly done that through our devices and technologies to date. So when we talk about our vision, we are really looking at this interconnected community of homes, of domestic properties particularly. We are strategically focused on the domestic sector, but we are not exclusively in the domestic sector. And in order to create these simple, accessible and convenient ecosystems for customers, and most importantly, pioneer a simple transition to renewable energy. And I'll come back to that word simple a little bit later on, because that word is incredibly important to us when we come to talk about ease of use and customer engagement in flexibility in particular. So next slide, please. So when we look at how we solve the problem that we addressed on the previous slides, our core capabilities, as I've said, are around the hardware, the technology itself. So we have grown the business predominantly by selling to the wholesale sector, but also we are now direct to consumer as well. So we sell direct to consumers and install products within the myenergi team. We integrate those through our digital platform, which I'll show you in a minute. But we are, importantly for this webinar, we're moving to the right with a growing capability around the aggregation and trading of energy, earning revenues and delivering grid services in response to that, and sharing those rules with our partners and customers. So very much about engaging the customer in flexibility in order to recognise that they will receive benefits and incentives in the future. And obviously, as we talked about stacking revenues and so on, that we know those numbers will change inevitably in future. We may not always see such generous incentives to consumers on an individual level, but we know that there'll be incentives to be flexible with energy in future, and we very much buy into the vision of a decentralised and distributed energy system where consumers play a much larger role than they do today. So moving on to the next slide, please. So I won't go through all of our products, but our products are pretty much on the screen there on the left-hand side. So effectively kind of 4 pieces of hardware at the moment and our digital platform, our app. But the top 2 are probably the most important from the point of view of flexibility markets. So our Zappi EV charger, which can obviously adjust. It was kind of very much the original smart charger in the UK, not just the world's first solar charger, but very much a smart charger on its own without solar needed. We can optimize that against tariffs. We've just integrated with Octopus Energy's intelligent Octopus Go tariff, for example, to enable customers to benefit from the services that provides them. And our Libby home battery. So this isn't something we manufacture in the UK, but it's contract manufactured for us. So it's a myenergi nameplate product. And that hybrid battery system allows consumers to obviously soak up renewables, soak up their own generation, but also be smart around the dynamic tariffs that are out there and the time of use tariffs that are out there. So we know there are customers already using this for kind of arbitrage purposes. I mean, without any solar input really, on the wet and dark days we've had recently, I was participating in the DFS a couple of days ago, where I charged a battery for about 9 pence a kilowatt hour overnight, and I was discharging my Libby and gaining about £2 a kilowatt hour for an hour during that service, for example. So we know that customers engaging in DFS through our Libby home battery product as well. So going on to the next slide, a little bit about our customers. So worldwide, we have shipped over 600,000 devices now. We've got around about 300,000 of those are our Zappi EV charger. So it's not just about EV charging. We're not just an EV charging company. Importantly, we look at the next 5 years, and we think that we'll have well over 3.5 gigawatts of potential connected capacity. Obviously, that's very much reliant on the customer's engagement. We can't provide their capacity unless they opt in and allow us to do that. And even in the UK today, our live connected capacity today, so that is customers who are connected to the system, who we can see, etc., is greater in the UK than Hinkley A, for example, nuclear power station. We have more than 500 megawatts connected capacity just today. Next slide, please. I won't dwell on this, but our digital customer experience, our app, is predominantly how our customers engage with our products. They don't necessarily have to do much with our hardware day to day. They don't necessarily have to look at it, and other than plugging in their car, and there's not much physical interaction with the device that's necessarily needed. And we do it all through our app. And our customers, coming back to that word simple I mentioned at the beginning, we very much believe that we have to make it as easy as possible for customers to engage in the energy transition generally, but also with the technologies that allow them to play an active role in that transition. So we put a huge amount of emphasis on our digital platform and digital customer experience to ensure that customers can engage in flexibility and their energy in an intelligent way. So just moving on to some of the case studies we've participated in. I'll skip past this slide, but this was just giving you an idea of the kind of consumption we can see in an individual home level, and obviously we can see where those homes are on the map as well. So we can go on the next one. It's fine. So we participated in a couple of trials around flexibility at the national level, but trials no less before DFS. So one was called FRED, Flexibility Responsive Energy Delivery. So this was a UK funded project by BASE, as it was. Now DESNZ, so looking at a pilot cohort of our customers, which was really the first proof of concept that EV charging could contribute to domestic flexibility. So that was a pilot in which we were involved, and very much gave us insights that allowed us to then carry forward, for example, to the DFS last year. Another one, if you go to the next slide, is called DINO. We like our 4-letter acronyms around here. So the Domestic Infrastructure Network Optimization was really about creating the control solution to enable local energy operators to effectively get engaged with the opportunities that EV storage and heat pump optimization presented to them as well. So the outputs from the FRED trial, for example, saw us reduce the cost of supply by about 26%, the cost of supplying electricity, and there was about an 18% saving from flexibility revenues as well available. So really, really good proofs of concept that showed that we're in the right direction with flexibility around not just EV charging, but also the other parts of our system offering. So DFS, the next slide, and we participated last year. We have we're not as big as Octopus Energy or the huge participating players in that space, but we had a very good cohort of thousands of customers opting in, giving us a very decent amount of flexible capacity. We saw an average demand reduction much higher than most other players because we had EV chargers in the mix. So we saw an average demand reduction of over 4 kilowatts per participant, and an average value per participant of more than £15 per event, which is obviously really impressive, and obviously very attractive to the consumer, which is very important. It's worth saying, I think, that we fully automated this last year. So we weren't pinging people 5 minutes before saying, remember to turn your charger off or remember to go outside and adjust your charging. This was all fully automated in the background. We did all the controlling of it. and there were no customer complaints. There was no negative feedback. In fact, as far as I know, we had one customer inquiry about it during the whole of the DFS, which was someone saying, "Did it work?" Basically, I just wanted to know kind of how it's all going because he was just curious. So we didn't have any dissatisfaction. We didn't have any customers let down or anything by the charging profiles, and we did it all automated, which I think again is really important. And I think that's
Tom.
it from me.
Great,
Yep.
Perfect timing.
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Good, so we've it's really interesting. Thank you, Tom. So we've got a little time now for some questions and answers. So if you do have any, please do pop them in the list. So one of the first questions I think I'll probably ask Lois to answer this is around the figure we mentioned about sort of the 27 million for kind of total value of the potential local flex market. And I think specifically of that 7 is from the ENWL competitions. So Lois, do you just want to say how you calculate for ENWL, I think you mentioned it's £7 million worth, these local flex. How do you calculate that figure?
Yeah. So all network operators are required to use what's called a common evaluation methodology and tool. So it's a cost-benefit analysis model that uses the scenarios that I showed you on the first set of slides that have got all of the different scenarios about demand and generation that identify the point at which you're going to be constrained on the network. So you put in all of those forecasts, weigh that against what the reinforcement cost would be. So that's actually studied on an individual basis to say, if we were going to put spades in the ground and, you know, put some larger transformers in at this site, exactly how much would that scheme cost? And that exact cost is then put into the model to identify what the potential ceiling price is to then offer back out to the market as a cost of flexibility. So that's why there is such significant variation within the ceiling prices that are offered, you know, all over the country. But, you know, we see huge variances from the centre of Manchester to somewhere in rural Cumbria, because it might be that you need a massive extent of cable, or you might just need to do, you know, one metre of an adaptation. So the prices are driven by what that counterfactual reinforcement costs.
Great. Thank you, Lois. So perhaps I had a question for Tom about how do you, as you mentioned, you said you automated the actual service of how you flex the consumer's assets. How do you get people involved in the first place? Kind of is it as when you sell them the kind of the Zappy charger, it's an additional service you offer, or do you have to go out and sort of with marketing materials to try and persuade them to be involved in any type of flexibility service?
It's a really good question. I think the view we have, reflecting on last year, the service was an opt-in service, but it was opt-in for the whole period. We've now got a situation with the DFS where you have to opt in to each event. Personally speaking, I mean, I think the most sort of almost engaging scenario is perhaps where we can do it straight out of the box, and actually it's an opt-out rather than an opt-in, and that can almost presumed consent potentially if there's not going to be a huge disruption to the customer. I think if you create too many stage gates for the customer, you might actually turn them off rather than allowing them to just provide maximum flexibility. So I think getting them sort of opted into the whole service and then actually doing it in the background worked really well from the point of view of being able to actually offer these services up. I think the adding an extra stage gate of, well, they've actually got to consent to every single time potentially is a future negative. So that I think it'll be interesting to see the kind of A/B test, if you like, on this year's DFS versus last year's, and whether that has an impact, people having to opt into each event. I think the best thing is, though, if we can enable it and assume that customers are happy unless they say otherwise, that may well deliver the greatest amount of flexibility that we will no doubt need.
Great, thank you. Good. And then I think there's a question about kind of international perspectives. So I'll answer this briefly, then I'll just turn to Naomi for a brief response as well. So yes, Piccolo operates now internationally. So we run these local flex markets in Portugal, Italy, the US, as well as Lithuania. So we can roll them out, and we're seeing more interest in these markets as well. Naomi, do you want to say anything from your perspective of how I suppose UK activity on flexibility, local flex is influencing international activity?
Yeah, thank you. So last week I spoke at a conference. So it was our equivalent in Portugal, Trade Association, and they wanted to hear about the experience of the GB markets in opening up, unlocking flexibility, particularly in the DNO markets, because I think they did their first auction a couple of weeks ago. So they were really interested in how they can scale up faster than we have here, how they can learn from that experience, and also how they can roll it to other markets. So it was interesting to see that that's happening and people are learning from GB experience.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Naomi. So I think we are out of time now. Basically, we're near the end. So apologies if there's a couple of questions we didn't get to, but we can pick those up separately and send a response by email. So I think finally, thank you very much all for joining. If you are interested, as I said, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar. Thank you very much to the speakers for their time. It was a very interesting discussion and hearing about the different perspectives. And if you do want to get involved, so we'd encourage you to get a share of this £27 million, which is available right now, which is in addition to the other revenues from other markets. Do email us at support@picloflex.com or book a demo. And we look forward to hearing from everyone soon. And with that, I'll thank you again and wish you a good weekend when you get there. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matthew. Thank you, Piclo.
Thank you. Cheers all. Thanks. Bye-bye.